If you have been learning and memorizing tons of foreign language vocab, but when it comes to having conversations, you can't use any of it, you're doing it wrong. My name is Jamie, I'm a language coach, and in this video, let's talk about what you need to be doing instead. The first thing that you need to do is you need to stop translating. This means the method that you use to learn vocabulary in school, where you have a flashcard and you have the English on one side and you have the foreign language word on the other side, the translated word on the other side, and you flip back and forth and you learn to translate your vocabulary. You need to stop. When you do this, you're not learning new vocabulary. What you're doing is you're learning vocabulary in relation to vocabulary that you already know. So what does this mean? Basically, when you're trying to speak in a new language, you're trying to express yourself and communicate using new vocabulary, right? When you are translating, you are teaching your brain to think of the word in English or your native language, translate it, and then spit it out in that new vocabulary. Theoretically, this doesn't sound like it's wrong, but what happens when you have something that you're trying to communicate, but it doesn't really communicate, it doesn't really translate between both languages. Thing is, languages aren't just different vocabulary words smushed together in the same way. Learning a new language means learning an entirely new way of communication. So if you are automatically trying to communicate in your native language and then translating that into a second language, then it's just not going to translate well and you're going to find yourself stuck every single time. And if you've tried to communicate using vocabulary words that you've learned in this method, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Not only are you adding that obstacle to your ability to have conversations, but you're also adding the obstacle of translating. Translation should not be involved in normal conversations in a foreign language. Because if you're translating, that means that you are not training your brain to think in the foreign language. What you are doing is you're causing your brain to think in your native language, having a second step of translating those words, which takes forever, and then have the third step in trying to communicate in those translated words that likely don't actually make sense, and you probably know this. Learning new vocabulary via translation has its place, but not when it comes to just learning how to have conversations. Honestly, it's an entirely different skill that uses completely different parts of your brain. If you don't want to spend your time translating and you want to spend your time having conversations, don't work that muscle. It's the wrong muscle. It's like focusing all of your time working out your biceps when what you really want to do is run a marathon. They're related, but it's really not the easiest way to go about it. The next thing that you're doing wrong when it comes to having foreign language conversations is obsessing over grammar. It can be really easy to obsess over grammar, especially when you already know how to study it and how to learn it and how to feel like you're succeeding in it. But the problem is that most conversations don't require a whole lot of grammar. At least when you're starting out, at least for regular day-to-day conversations in your target language, most grammar is not necessary. You'll only need the very basic bare minimum in order to communicate. Your ability to conjugate grammar and to name grammatical points and to understand how to switch out word endings and things like that have little to no impact on your ability to communicate. So if you are spending your time learning intermediate or advanced level grammar, but you can't put two words together in a real life conversation, drop your grammar. Don't worry about it. You don't need it right now. It is a waste of your time and energy. In fact, when you think about your native language, when you know all the grammar to a T, but you don't necessarily know the rules. You can't necessarily explain to somebody why you conjugate a certain sentence a certain way. You just know it. If you're trying to have conversations in your target language, this is a level of knowledge that we want in grammar. It can be helpful to understand this at a conceptual level, but it's really not necessary. What you're looking for is that more intuitive knowledge, and that comes with practice. And you're not going to get that by memorizing conjugation tables and rules. The next thing that you need to know about having foreign language conversations is to drop the flashcards and instead go for spaced repetition. What is spaced repetition, or SRS? Think about when you have 100 flashcards. You generally go through all the flashcards at about the same time. Maybe if you're a little bit better, you have different piles of easy, medium, and hard flashcards. With the easy flashcards, you can put those away, focus more on the vocabulary that is harder for you to learn, and go like that. Spaced repetition is an algorithm that pretty much puts this concept on steroids. Spaced repetition is a system that you can find in various language learning apps and resources that'll basically respond to how easy or how difficult any vocabulary word is for you. Put it to the side and then use an algorithm. Honestly, I'm not really sure about the science of it. I just know that it works. That holds easy vocabulary back until you're about to forget it and then shows it to you again. So while some words you only need to see it once every month or so, once every 6 months, once every year, just to make sure that you don't forget about it, it'll take more difficult words and keep showing it to you over and over and over and over and over again until eventually your brain picks it up, because sometimes that's just what we need. This means that learning vocabulary is not only easier, but it's less frustrating and a lot more efficient. Takes a lot less time. Because if you're learning a bunch of words to have conversations, you don't want to waste your time on vocabulary that you already know when you have words that you need but just aren't getting in your brain because they need a little bit more time. Speaking of spaced repetition, my next tip is to make sure that you are using spaced repetition that is self-reporting. What does this mean? Tons and tons of different language apps will claim that they use spaced repetition, and while they may, personally, I do not trust spaced repetition that is not self-reporting, which means spaced repetition where it asks you how easy or how difficult a certain term is and you tell it. And this is for two reasons. The first reason is that an app doesn't know if you are struggling with a word or if you are going for a glass of water and taking 5 seconds to drink a sip of water or sitting there for 5 seconds thinking about the word. You don't know if maybe the app is lagging and that it assumes that it's your brain lagging, not the app. There's so many potential variables to go into how quickly or slowly we respond to a term that might have to do with how easy that term is for us, or it might not. It might be completely different and unrelated whatsoever to the actual concept that I personally do not trust any spaced repetition algorithm that does not allow input from me. And then the second reason is that when it's self-reporting, it'll tell you how much longer it's going to be until the next time you see it. So generally when you see this, you'll see 3 buttons, easy, medium, or hard. And then easy will say, okay, we won't show this to you for another 2 weeks. Medium is, okay, we'll show it to you in a week. And then hard, we might show it to you in the next 5 minutes. So we can be a lot more aware and a lot more educated as to when we're gonna see this term next, and so we can understand how we're teaching our brains to understand these concepts. While spaced repetition can be really, really helpful if done right, my next tip is to make sure you're not focusing on learning 10 gazillion words at a time and making sure instead that you can use the words that you already know. It can be really easy to see that sense of accomplishment when we're successfully memorizing a ton of words, but it's when we try to use those words that we think that we know that we can really get frustrated. Thing is, learning how to communicate in a foreign language isn't about learning and memorizing a bunch of words. It's about taking the words that you know and learning how to use these new rules to communicate. Being able to communicate and have conversations in a new language is about getting all these different tools and boundaries and rules and learning how to mold what we want to express into this new kind of picture, this new kind of sentence. All of our lives, we've known the rules, we've known the tools, we've known how to basically work our way around different grammar rules and vocabulary to express ourselves in a very specific way, express ourselves how we like to express ourselves. But when you change the tools, you change the boundaries, you change the rules, you change cultural norms, you change what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Having conversations is less about learning new words and more about understanding how those words interact with each other and how you can use these new strategies and tools and resources to express the same ideas, just differently. And this can be really, really difficult, not only because it's training your brain to function in an entirely different way, but also it can be really, really hard to see that we're doing it right. Communication is such a simple, basic intrinsic thing that we forget sometimes how easy it is for ourselves, that when we try to do it in a completely different way, it's kind of shocking how difficult it is to express very, very simple concepts. On the other hand, when we have something like memorizing vocabulary and learning grammatical conjugations, those are easy. We can do that. That gives us a sense of comfort. It's when we're trying to do something that's completely new that it's really, really, really difficult. And this can scare a lot of language learners away. This is a great segue for my next tip, which is to lower your expectations. Actually, drop any expectations that you have for yourself at all. So many of us go into language learning expecting if you put in this many hours and you will achieve this result, but that's not how language learning works at all. In fact, the most experienced polyglots who know so many different languages, they can't tell you exactly how long any language, any concept is going to take. On the contrary, they've learned to lower their expectations and just take language learning as it goes. So if you have any expectations whatsoever, especially if you've never successfully learned a language, you're just going to be setting yourself up for failure. And it's not that there's something wrong with you, it's something wrong with your expectations. So go ahead and just toss them out. That said, my next tip is to start small. As I mentioned earlier in this video, it can be really, really easy to expect conversations to come as easily, or at least close to easily, as conversations in our native language come. But when we start training our brain to do something completely new, it can be really, really difficult, and that can be really, really scary, especially when we expect more of ourselves than is actually reasonable. For example, a lot of people on the internet will say, if you want to have conversations, have conversations. And while this is true, it can be really, really overwhelming, and that might not be step 1 for you. That might be step 5. If you try and throw yourself into a conversation with a native speaker and you are just stuck, you need to back up like a lot. What does this mean? This can mean starting with talking to yourself. This could mean saying very, very simple sentences like, I eat food. How do you say that in your target language? And just saying it out loud. Depending on the language, depending on your experience, this in itself can be really, really difficult and really, really taxing. And while this can feel like you are slow, like you are failing, on the contrary, it's great. Because what's important is that you are putting yourself on the path to your goal. It might not look exactly like you thought it was going to look, but that's okay. This is why in my mini training, Mastering Conversations, I give you ideas of how you can take several steps back from having conversations and start really, really small with doing things like just talking to yourself. It also links you to various resources that you can use to help you with these much smaller steps before you start having conversations. Because sometimes you really just need to build up your confidence first before you start really challenging your conversational skills. You don't want to hold the standard so high that you're stopping yourself from making any progress at all. If you're expecting yourself to have conversations and you just can't, and you say, okay, well, there's nothing left for me to do, I'm just gonna give up, then you're not getting anywhere. Whereas if you realize that having conversations in a foreign language are too much, so you step way back and decide to start talking to yourself in simple sentences, that's at least something. You're moving, you're gonna start making progress consistently. You just have to start further back than you were planning to, and that's how language learning goes sometimes. This leads into my next tip, which is to focus on speaking badly. Focus on doing it poorly. Like I've said earlier in this video, it's going to be a lot more difficult than you expect it to be, and that's okay. So instead of trying to have conversations and trying to be perfect, instead work on being really, really bad. Work on doing it poorly and making all the mistakes. Because when you do this, at the very least, you are trying, and that is the first step. Having conversationally fluent conversations and doing it with very limited mistakes, that's level 20. Start at level 1, where you are just saying words and you're doing it poorly and you're not making any sense. Because that is the first step to training your brain to do something that's completely brand new. It can be really helpful to think of a small child, like a 2-year-old that is learning to have conversations. All they know is like 2 words. And yet they use those words to communicate their needs. They don't communicate well. They don't communicate with complex vocabulary or grammar. They say the bare minimum. They use the words that they know, the sounds that they know to communicate what they need. as easily and as efficiently as possible. Seriously, when I say to dumb down the expectations, I really, really, really mean it. Language learning is a lot more slow than a lot of people on the internet will have you know. And to get all these tips down, my last one is to watch this video all about why you can't think in the language. This is an excellent next step to remember, get rid of all of these things that are getting in the way of having conversations. So if you're ready to make that next step in having foreign language conversations for real, make sure to check out that video.